That was the first thing, before anything strange, before any of it, just the smell. Propane and cedar and the particular mustiness of wool blankets that have spent 9 months folded in a cold place. I pushed the door open and it came out to meet me like a dog that had been waiting a long time, and I had to stand on the step for a full minute with my hand flat against the door frame. Because 43 years old or not, that smell put me back at 6. It does that. Scent goes straight past the part of you that grew up and knocks on the door of the part that didn't. I stood there longer than I want to admit. Behind me, the lake was making its small sounds against the rocks, the way it always had, patient and indifferent, and the late September light was coming sideways through the firs, the gold going thin and cold the way it does up there in the last weeks of the season. And in front of me was the dark mouth of a house that smelled like a man who'd been dead since March. I could have turned around. I want to be clear about that from the start. There was a moment on that step where I could have gotten back in the truck and gone home and let the place become someone else's problem, and I didn't. And everything that happened after is, in some sense, the long consequence of a man standing too long in a doorway because he liked the smell of his own grief. My father died in March. The cabin was mine now, along with a truck I didn't want and a savings account that turned out to be mostly intention. I'd driven up in late September to clean the place out and put it on the market, which is the kind of sentence that sounds simple until you're standing inside 37 summers of someone's life and realizing it all has to go into boxes or into the lake. Let me tell you about the place first, because you need to feel it the way I did. You need to understand why I stayed when I should have left, and why, even now, part of me wishes I hadn't. The cabin sat on the north shore of a reservoir that doesn't have a real name anymore. On the maps, it's a number, a string of digits, and a designation that means nothing to anyone who didn't help draw the map. The locals called it Halvers, after a town that's under the water now. They flooded the valley in the 50s, built the dam, opened the gates, and let a whole little settlement go quiet under 40 feet of green water over the course of a single wet spring. My father liked that fact more than he should have. He used to say the lake had a basement, and on still mornings, when the surface went to glass, you could almost believe it. You'd see the reflection of the trees laid out perfect on the water, and underneath the reflection, if you looked past it, you'd see the deeper dark, the place where the light stopped going down, and somewhere in that dark there were door frames and a church with its steeple snapped off, and the foundation of a school where children had once recited their letters. I used to lie on the dock as a boy and try to imagine them down there. Desks, a blackboard going soft, the slow green hush of a place where people used to say goodnight to each other and now nobody said anything at all. He worked seasonal ranger contracts up there for most of his life, fire watch in the dry months, trail maintenance, the slow, unglamorous custody of a place almost nobody visited. The reservoir wasn't pretty enough to draw tourists and wasn't stocked well enough to draw fishermen. So for most of the year it was just him and the water, and the trees and whatever it is that lives in the spaces between trees. We didn't have money, but we had the cabin from May to September, and for a kid that's the same thing as being rich. I had the whole shoreline. I had a canoe with a patched seam that I bailed with a coffee can, and a fishing rod I was genuinely bad with, and an entire forest that belonged, as far as I knew, to me. And I had the game. I should explain the game, because the game is the whole thing, really. Everything else is just the road that leads to it, and I'd rather walk you down that road slowly than drop you at the end of it without your shoes. I was a nervous child. I don't say that with any shame now. I was small, and the woods at night are very large, and the dark up there isn't city dark, it's complete, and it's the kind of dark that has a weight to it, that presses against your eyes whether they're open or shut. When the lamp went out, the blackness had a texture, and the sounds came in close the way sounds do when you can't see. The lake licking the rocks, the wind walking through the firs with that long exhaling hush, the cabin itself ticking and settling as the day's heat went out of the wood. And underneath all of that, sometimes, there were other sounds, things moving that I couldn't name, the careful crack of a branch under a weight, a slow displacement in the underbrush that started and stopped, as if whatever made it knew exactly how much noise it could afford. I'd lie in the loft bed and listen to the forest breathing, and I'd cry, quietly, the way kids cry when they don't want to be heard, with the blanket pulled up over my mouth so the sound wouldn't carry down the ladder to where my father sat reading by the stove. He figured it out anyway. He figured everything out, the way he always did, without ever making a big deal of it. And one night, instead of climbing the ladder to tell me there was nothing out there which would have been a lie, and which I wouldn't have believed anyway, because I could hear that there was something out there, he taught me the game. He sat on the edge of my too small bed with the lamp turned low, and the light made his face all warm hollows and soft edges, and he said very plainly, the way you'd tell a child the weather, "There's something out there. Sure there is. There's always something out there, but it's polite." And then he reached over and knocked on the cedar wall beside my pillow. 3 times. Slow. Knock, knock, knock. I can still feel the way the sound went into the wood and into the bed and into my chest. "You knock back," he said. "Same as that. 3 times. No more, no less. And then you listen. And if it knocks back at you, that means it knows you're a person, and it'll leave a person be. It's just checking. It's just saying goodnight, same as me." I knocked back, 3 times, small, with my child's knuckles on the cedar wall, and the sound seemed very thin and very brave going out into all that dark. And we waited, and from somewhere out past the woodshed, out where the cleared ground gave up and the trees started, and I swear to you I heard this. I have heard it every night of my life since in one form or another something knocked back, 3 times, far off, slow and even and patient, as if it had all the time in the world and a great deal more than that besides. Knock, knock, knock. And I stopped being afraid, just like that. It's hard to explain to anyone who didn't grow up scared of the dark. But my father had taken the single worst thing about my whole small world and turned it in the space of about 90 seconds into a friend. The thing out there wasn't a monster, it was a neighbor. We had a way of talking to it, and as long as we were polite, it would be polite right back, and the dark stopped being a held breath and became instead a kind of company. I slept like a stone after that. Every single night for years I knocked 3 times on that cedar wall before I let myself close my eyes. And I'd lie there and wait. And the answer always came, far off and even, out past the woodshed, and I'd smile into my pillow in the dark and think the same thought every time. It's still there. It still knows me. I want you to sit with how lovely that was for a moment. I really do. Because if you don't understand how much I loved that sound, how safe it made me, how it became the bedrock under every good memory I have of my father, then you won't understand any of the rest of it. You won't understand why a grown man with a sensible job and a sensible mind would do what I did. The horror in this story doesn't live in the woods. It lives inside the warmest thing I own. So, September, 43 years old, standing in the doorway of a dead man's cabin with the smell of him going into my lungs. I told myself I'd give it a week. Box up the kitchen, sort the tools, decide what was worth keeping and what could go to the dump or to the lake. The power had been off for months. He'd let the line lapse a few winters back and just never reconnected it, living the old way out of habit or stubbornness, so I lived the way we used to. Propane lamp. The little wood stove that drew badly until you learned its temper. Water hauled up from the lake in a galvanized bucket and boiled on the ring. It all came back faster than I expected. The body remembers a place even when the mind has filed it away. My hands knew where the matches lived without my having to look. My feet knew the loose board on the porch, the third one from the door, and stepped over it without my telling them to, the way they'd done 10,000 times before I had a driver's license or a mortgage or a dead father. The first 2 days were almost happy, if I'm honest, and I want to be honest, because the happiness is part of how the thing works. Grief is strange. You expect it to be all weight, a stone you carry, and instead it comes in tides, and in the troughs between the waves there's this enormous quiet. And in the quiet I found I could love the place again without it cutting me. I'd work all morning, sorting, wrapping, carrying, and then in the afternoon I'd take a thermos of coffee out to the dock and sit with my back against the cleat and watch the light come down the far ridge in slow gold bands. And I'd think about him, and it would be all right. It would be all right. A loon would call somewhere out on the water, that long, mad, wavering note, and the cold would start to come up off the lake as the sun went, and I'd think this was a good place to be a boy. He gave me a good place to be a boy. I found his things slowly. That's the particular cruelty of cleaning out a house. You don't grieve a person all at once, in one clean wound. You grieve them in objects, 100 small ambushes spread across 100 drawers. His reading glasses folded on the windowsill above the sink, the lenses fogged with dust, still facing the lake as if he'd just set them down to look at something. A grocery list in his blocky all-capital handwriting. Coffee, fuses, batteries, line for a trip down the mountain he never took. His fishing vest hanging on the hook by the door with a hand-tied fly still snagged in the wool of the collar, an elk hair caddis gone ragged from God knows what summer, from some morning on the water that only he remembered and now nobody did. Each one knocked the wind out of me and then, after a while, let me get back up. That's grief. That's just grief. I knew what that was. I'd lost my mother years before, and I knew the shape of mourning, the way it ebbs and returns, and none of it frightened me. It was on the third night that I heard the knocking. I want to be very careful here, because I've turned this part over more than any other, and I've tried hard to be honest with myself about what I actually experienced versus what I built around it afterward, in the cold light of everything I learned later. Memory is a liar, especially a grieving one. So let me give you the facts first, plainly, the way I'd write them in a field log. I was in the loft. The same narrow bed I'd slept in as a boy, too short for me now. So I slept with my feet hanging off the end and my head against the wall, the same cedar wall I used to knock on. The lamp was out. The stove had burned down to a sullen orange seam behind the glass. The lake was doing its quiet work against the rocks below, and I was lying there in that complete northern dark, drifting, thinking about nothing in particular, halfway down into sleep when I heard it. Knock, 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 from out past the woodshed, from where the trees start, far off, slow, even, patient. I came fully awake, but I didn't move. My heart had started going, that quick high flutter, but my mind, and this is the part that shames me a little now, my mind was almost delighted, that old reflex, that child's joy, surfacing whole and warm after 30-some years. It's still there. It still knows me. Some animal, I told myself a half-second later, as the adult caught up to the child. A deer working at a tree, a branch knocking against a trunk in the wind. There are 100 things in a forest that can make a knocking sound, and I had spent my entire adult life learning to find the rational flaw under any anomaly. That's literally my job, finding the dull true cause under the strange-looking number, and I found the flaw then, easily, and I let my head settle back into the pillow. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. There was no wind that night, none. I'd noticed it standing on the dock at sunset, because the water had gone to absolute glass, flat as a held breath, the far ridge laid out perfect and upside down on its surface. Not a breath of air moving anywhere on that lake. A branch can't knock without wind, and a deer doesn't knock 3 times and stop. 3 and stop, with a space between them, with a rhythm, with what I can only call intention. I told myself I was tired. I told myself grief makes you hear what you most want to hear, and that what I wanted more than anything, more than I'd ever let myself admit, was to hear that sound again, the sound that meant my father was 12 feet below me reading by the stove, and the dark was a friend, and I was 6 years old and safe, and nothing bad had happened yet. The mind is a generous liar when you're mourning. It will hand you the dead back in pieces if you only agree not to look too closely. So that's what I told myself, and I half believed it, and after a long while I went back down into sleep. I didn't knock back. I want you to remember that. The third night, the first night, I heard it, and I did not knock back. It matters later, more than almost anything. The next day I worked on the woodshed, and I'm telling you this so you understand what kind of man I am. I'm not someone who hears a strange sound and runs from it. I went straight to the source. The woodshed stands maybe 60 feet from the cabin, right at the edge of the cleared ground, on the exact line where the mown grass gives up and the forest floor takes over that border. My father always kept so carefully clipped back, season after season, with an old push mower and a pair of loppers, a job I'd thought of as just a tidy man's habit. I went through that shed board by board, looking for anything that could knock in the night, a loose plank slapping in a draft, a tool hung wrong, swinging, an animal's nest, a pack rat or a squirrel that might thump. I found mouse droppings and a papery dead wasp comb and a coil of old rope and, leaning in the back corner, my father's good axe, the one with the hickory handle worn dark and smooth as a river stone. I took the axe back to the cabin and stood it by the door, and I'm glad now that I did, even though it turned out to be no use against the kind of thing that was coming, because there are fears that an axe can't touch, and there are nights when you just need to hold something heavy. And on the inside of the woodshed door, low down, I found the marks. 3 of them. 3 shallow round dents in the wood, close together, the kind you'd make by knocking on the same spot over and over for years. The grain around them was worn pale and smooth, polished by repetition, the way a stair banister goes glassy under 1,000 sliding hands. And I knew immediately what they were, because the memory came back whole and warm the second I saw them. I used to come out to the woodshed in the daytime as a boy and knock on the door and wait, the way you'd knock on a friend's door to see if he could come out and play. A child's logic, perfectly sound from the inside. My friend lived out past the trees, and the woodshed was the closest thing to a door my friend had. So I'd knock on it 3 times in the bright, safe afternoon and stand there in the sun listening and feel a private happiness when nothing answered. Because of course nothing answered. It was daytime. My friend was asleep. You don't bother a friend who's sleeping. I'd forgotten that completely. Decades buried, and now here it was, the whole of it. Me at 7 years old in a striped shirt, knocking on a shed door and listening to a forest that politely held its breath. But the marks were too high. That's what stopped me, standing there in the cold morning with the door open in my hand. I crouched down to look at them properly, to put my own knuckles where the dents were, and the dents sat at the height of my chest while I was crouching. Which meant that standing and a 7-year-old is not tall, they'd have been a foot or more above my head. I could not have made those marks. Not as the child I remembered being. Whoever made them had knocked from low down, from a crouch, or from their knees, or from something that simply lived closer to the ground than a man does, and they'd done it patiently, in the same place for a very long time. I stood up too fast and the blood went out of my head and I had to put a hand on the door frame. And then I did the thing you would do, the thing anyone would do, the thing I'm not ashamed of because it's only human. I went looking for a reason. And the forest of reasons is every bit as thick as the real forest, and you can lose yourself just as completely in it. My father made the marks, I decided, teaching me, demonstrating before I was old enough to remember. Or some other ranger's child, some summer I knew nothing about, had stood here and played the same game. Or it was rot, or beetles, or the door swinging against a nailhead for decades. There are always reasons. I picked one and put the others down and went back inside and kept packing, and I told myself I wasn't thinking about it. That's a lie. I thought about it all day, every minute, while my hands wrapped plates in newspaper and stacked them in boxes. But my hands kept moving, because moving hands are how my family has always handled fear. My father's solution to any dread was a task, mine too. We are people who tighten what's loose and oil what's dry, because as long as the hands are busy, the mind can pretend it's the one in charge. That night I heard it again. Knock, 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 closer. Not at the woodshed anymore. Past the woodshed was the tree line proper, the true edge of the forest, and the sound was at the tree line now. Right at the border of the cleared ground, maybe 40 feet from the cabin wall, 40 feet from where I lay, slow, even, patient. The exact rhythm of my childhood, the exact rhythm my father had knocked on the wall by my bed, that I had knocked back, that something had answered from the dark 3 times every night for years. I lay in the loft with my eyes wide open and my heart going hard, and I did not knock back. And after a while, and this is the part where the fear changed, where it stopped being a child's fear and became the cold, quiet, adult kind, the kind that doesn't go away when you turn the light on, the kind that follows you into well-lit rooms in the middle of the day. After a while, it knocked again. I stood up too fast and the blood went out of my head and I had to put a hand on the door frame. And then I did the thing you would do, the thing anyone would do, the thing I'm not ashamed of because it's only human. I went looking for a reason. And the forest of reasons is every bit as thick as the real forest, and you can lose yourself just as completely in it. My father made the marks, I decided, teaching me, demonstrating before I was old enough to remember. Or some other ranger's child, some summer I knew nothing about, had stood here and played the same game. Or it was rot, or beetles, or the door swinging against a nailhead for decades. There are always reasons. I picked one and put the others down and went back inside and kept packing, and I told myself I wasn't thinking about it. That's a lie. I thought about it all day, every minute, while my hands wrapped plates in newspaper and stacked them in boxes. But my hands kept moving, because moving hands are how my family has always handled fear. My father's solution to any dread was a task, mine too. We are people who tighten what's loose and oil what's dry, because as long as the hands are busy, the mind can pretend it's the one in charge. That night I heard it again. Knock, 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 closer. Not at the woodshed anymore. Past the woodshed was the tree line proper, the true edge of the forest, and the sound was at the tree line now, right at the border of the cleared ground, maybe 40 feet from the cabin wall, 40 feet from where I lay, slow, even, patient. The exact rhythm of my childhood, the exact rhythm my father had knocked on the wall by my bed, that I had knocked back, that something had answered from the dark 3 times every night for years. I lay in the loft with my eyes wide open and my heart going hard, and I did not knock back. And after a while, and this is the part where the fear changed, where it stopped being a child's fear and became the cold, quiet, adult kind, the kind that doesn't go away when you turn the light on, the kind that follows you into well-lit rooms in the middle of the day. After a while, it knocked again. Knock, knock, knock. As if it had been waiting, as if it had noticed I hadn't given my answer, as if it were prompting me, the way you'd knock a second time on a door when you're fairly sure someone's home but they haven't come. And then nothing, just the lake, just the dark, just my own breathing, which I was working hard to keep slow and quiet, the way I had as a frightened boy, except I wasn't pretending to be asleep this time. I was holding still on purpose. I was, though I didn't have the words for it yet, refusing to answer, and some old part of me understood that refusing was the only safe thing to do, even though I couldn't have told you why. I lay like that until the window over the sink went from black to charcoal to a thin, defeated grey. I never closed my eyes. In the morning I did what my father's son does. I made coffee on the propane ring, and I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and I tried to be a hydrologist about it. I tried to measure the thing. That's how I'm built. When the world hands me something I can't explain, I reach for a pencil and start writing down what I actually know, because the knowns box in the unknown and make it smaller. So I wrote it out. The sound was either real or it wasn't. If it wasn't, if it was grief and exhaustion and an old loved memory clawing its way up out of me, then the cure was simple. Finish the work fast, get down the mountain, sleep in my own bed, and let the past stay drowned. But if it was real, then it was an animal, or a person, or some natural thing, and any of those would leave sign, tracks, broken brush, a reason a man could photograph and point to. So after I finished the coffee, I walked the tree line where the knocking had come from. The ground out there is soft years of pine duff laid down over black forest soil, and it takes an impression beautifully. My own boots left clean waffle prints, sharp-edged, as I walked. And there, at the very edge of the trees, right where the sound had been the night before, the ground was disturbed. Not tracks exactly. I've spent more hours than I can count trying to find a better word, and I've never managed it. It looked like someone had knelt there. 2 long shallow troughs in the duff, side by side, parallel, the length of a man's shins, and in front of them, between where the troughs ended and the first tree began, a patch where the duff had been pressed flat and the black soil showed through, and in that patch 3 round dents, the size of fists, knuckles. Something had knelt at the edge of my woods in the dark and knocked on the ground. I am a calm person. I need you to believe that, because everything depends on it. I measure rainfall and snowpack and the slow, honest rise and fall of water for a living. I do not frighten at shadows, and I do not build cathedrals out of coincidence. But I stood over those marks in the flat, cold morning light, and I felt the bottom go out of something I had been standing on my entire life without knowing it was there, because the marks were not fresh. Or they were, the top layer was, but underneath the fresh ones were older ones, fainter, and under those, fainter still. And under those barely readable depressions where the soil had been compacted and the duff had grown back over and been pressed down again, season over season, year over year, decade over decade, all in the same place, the same kneeling spot, the same 3 dents. Something had been coming to the edge of this clearing, kneeling in the exact same place and knocking on the ground for far, far longer than I had been alive, and my father had taught me to answer it. I went back inside and I went looking for what he knew, and I found the box. I hadn't gone into his bedroom yet. I'd been moving around it for 3 days, cleaning every other room first, the way you circle the deep end of a pool. But now I needed to know what he'd known. Needed it the way you need air, so I went in. The room was small and spare and very much his, the bed made tight with hospital corners, a habit from his army years. A chair, a dresser, a single window facing, of course, the tree line. And under the bed, pushed back against the wall where you'd have to lie down to see it, I found a fishing tackle box with the trays lifted out and the lures gone, and inside it, his papers. Not the official ones. Those, the deed and the insurance and the funeral arrangements, were in a labelled folder in a kitchen drawer, all in order, the considerate paperwork of a tidy man preparing to die. These were the other papers, the private arithmetic of a man's secret life. There were field notebooks, dozens of them, going back decades, the cheap green government kind with the sewn bindings and the water-stained covers. My father wrote everything down. It was the one true thing we shared. The impulse to log the world, and the early notebooks were exactly what you'd expect. Weather, water levels, trail conditions, fire indices, the small, dull, necessary data of a ranger's working life, recorded in that blocky hand, but threaded all through them, interleaved between the rainfall figures and the snowpack measurements, were other notes. Shorter, in a smaller, more careful hand, the way you write when you don't want even the page to overhear you. I'll give you a few of them the way I found them, scattered across the years. June 14th, no year I could place. It came to the line again. 3, I answered 3, quiet after. September 30th, 3 this morning before light. Strange, usually only after dark, answered 3. Walked the line at noon, fresh kneeling, same spot. Cleared the brush back another 2 feet. Keep the line clean, it respects a clean line. And then, in a different ink, the hand a little less steady. August 2nd. D heard it tonight, cried in the loft, thought I couldn't hear. Told him it's a friend, told him to knock 3 and it'll say good night. God forgive me. But it works. He's asleep now and his face is easy. I'll carry the rest of it myself. D was me. Daniel. I sat down on the floor of my dead father's bedroom with my back against his tight-made bed, and I read about myself as a frightened child. And I read my father deciding in real time in ink to lie to me, and I read between the lines and sometimes write out on them exactly what he understood that I never did. And it went back further than him. Tucked in among the notebooks were loose photocopied pages, the toner faded to brown at the edges, old typescript that had clearly been copied from a copy from a copy, a handed-down document. The way one ranger tells the next where the good springs are, which switchback washes out in a hard rain, where the old fire road still goes through. Practical inherited knowledge, the kind that never makes it into any manual because no manual would print it. It had no title. It read like notes someone had taken down from someone older, who'd taken them from someone older than that, going back, I came to believe, to before the valley was ever flooded, to whoever had lived in the town that was under the water now, in the houses with the door frames, who had learned to keep a clean line and answer 3 and say their goodnights and survive. I'm going to tell you what it said, more or less, because I've come to believe those rangers had figured out the only thing about this that can ever really be figured out, which is not what the thing is, but how to live beside it without being taken by it. They never solved it. I don't think it can be solved. They just learned its manners, the way you learn the manners of a hard country or a dangerous animal you have to share ground with. And the manners were these. It comes to the edge of cleared ground at night. It will not cross onto cleared ground, onto claimed ground, as long as the claim is acknowledged. It knocks 3 times, and if a person inside knocks back 3 times, no more and no less, then it understands that the ground is claimed, that a person is here, that there is a courtesy between the inside and the outside, and it leaves that person be. It is, the document said in its dry, careful way, checking the boundary, like a surveyor, like a man walking his fence line in the dark to see that the posts still stand. But, and here is the part I read 4 times, with the grey light coming up cold in the window, and my heart going slow and heavy and strange. You answer 3, only ever 3. You never answer more. You never answer fewer. You never go toward it. You never open the door to it. You never, under any circumstances and for any reason whatsoever, knock first. Because the knocking is not a greeting. The knocking is a question. And the question is always, always the same. Is someone home? Is someone a person? Is this ground still claimed? 3 knocks back is the only safe answer, and it says exactly one thing. Yes, a person claimed good night, and it will go. It is endlessly patient. It will come back the next night and ask again, the way the tide comes back, the way grief comes back, asking the same single question forever, and as long as you keep answering 3, it keeps the courtesy and the courtesy keeps you alive. But if you answer wrong, if you knock 4 or 5, if you knock first before it asks, if you go out to it, if you so much as step across the line toward the sound, then you are no longer answering its question. You are accepting an invitation. You are saying something else entirely. You are saying, I am not only a person here, I am coming. I am yours. And then the courtesy ends, because you have told it, in the only language it knows, that you wish to leave the claimed ground and go out and join whatever it is out there, in the dark, under the trees, down in the cold green water, in the drowned town with its door frames and its broken church and its school where nobody recites their letters anymore. My father's last entry was dated in March, the month he died. The hand was bad by then, shaky, the letters falling downhill across the page. It knocks every night now. 3. I answer 3. Always have, always will. But I'm tired in a way I can't put down. And some nights, God help me, some nights I want to answer 4 just to see, just to stop wondering. The house is so quiet since D stopped coming up. He's got his own life, his work, his water, and that's right. That's how it should be. I built him for that. But the quiet gets into a man. Some nights I miss my boy so bad, I think I'd walk right out to the line just to not be alone in here. That's how it gets the old ones, I think. Not by fear. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you inside. It's the loneliness. It waits and it waits, polite, knocking 3, until you're tired enough and alone enough to want the company. It's patient. It can outwait a whole life. It can outwait mine. The official cause of death was a bear attack. They found him at the tree line, 60 feet from the cabin just past the woodshed, on the soft ground where the knees go. They wrote bear on the form because the form has a box, and bear is one of the things you're allowed to write in the box. But there was no bear on the North Shore that spring, or the spring before, or the one before that. I went and checked the sighting logs later, sat in the regional office and read 3 years of entries, and the North Shore was empty of bear the whole time. There was no bear. There was a tired, lonely old man who had answered 3 knocks every night for 40 years so that his son could sleep, and who, one cold March night, finally, terribly, answered 4. I should have left that day. I know it. You know it. You've known it for a while now, reading this, the way you know it watching someone in a film walk toward the basement door. The smart thing, the only sane thing, was to walk out to the truck, drive down the mountain, call a realtor from the bottom, and let the whole place become someone else's problem, sight unseen. I knew it then, sitting on the floor of his room, with 30 years of his secret handwriting in my lap. But I want to tell you why I stayed one more night, because it's the truest and worst thing in all of this, and it's the very thing the document understood, and the very thing that killed my father. I stayed because I wanted to hear it knock one more time, not to answer it. I swore that to myself sitting on that floor. I told myself I would only listen. The way you'd sit a while at a grave, the way you'd play an old voicemail you should have deleted years ago just to hear the voice say your name. That knocking was the soundtrack of every safe night of my childhood. And it was, I understood now, the very last thing my father ever heard in this world. And so, in some unbearable backwards way, it was the closest thing to him I had left. He had stood out there in that dark with that sound, lonely past bearing, and he had walked toward it. And some animal part of me, some grieving part I did not trust and could not argue down, wanted to know what that had felt like. Wanted to stand where he had stood and feel the pull he had felt, just once, just to be near him. That, right there, is how it gets you. The document said so, in plainer words. It doesn't come for you as a monster you'd run from. It comes for you as the thing you miss most in all the world. I waited up. I sat in the main room in the chair by the dead stove with the lamp turned low, and my father's axe across my knees useless. I knew it was useless. You can't bury an axe in a question, but it gave my hands something heavy to hold, and that counted for something. And I waited. The afternoon light failed off the lake. The cold came up. The dark came down complete, the old complete northern dark, and the cabin ticked and settled around me as the heat went out of it. And at the hour my father always used to climb the ladder to tuck me in, it came to the line. Knock, 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 right at the edge of the trees, 40 feet away through one cabin wall, slow, even, patient. And then, and I have to tell you this even though I cannot prove it, and have never said it out loud to a living soul under the knocking, on the third round, or maybe the fourth, I heard something else. Not words, the shape of words. A low sound carried inside the rhythm of the knocking, and it had the cadence of a voice I knew better than my own. My father's cadence, the particular falling way he used to say goodnight, Danny, with the weight coming down soft on the night. It had stood at that tree line for 60 years and more. It had heard him say it 10,000 times through the thin cabin wall to a boy in a loft, and it had learned. It wanted me to answer, and God help me the way my father kept asking to be helped. I wanted to. I sat in that chair, and the want came up through me like cold water filling a boot, slow and total from the feet up. To knock back, just 3, just to say, I'm here, I'm a person, I hear you, good night. And then, and this was the real pull, this was the hook hidden inside the soft bait, and then to knock a 4th time. To say, and I'm coming, because he was out there. That's what the want kept telling me, in his voice from the dark. He's out there and he's so lonely and you can go to him. You don't have to be the one who's left behind anymore. You don't have to do the dishes and lock the truck and drive back down to an empty apartment and grieve for the rest of your life. You can just answer 4. Just stand up. Just walk out to the line in the dark and stop being alone. Just come home, Danny. Come home. I did not knock back. I made myself a stone. The same stillness I'd practiced as a frightened boy pretending to be asleep. Except now I knew exactly what I was doing and exactly why, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Because the document said the courtesy holds for as long as you keep answering 3, but it never once said you have to answer at all. And sitting there in the dark with my father's voice coming out of the woods, I finally understood the thing he understood too late. An answer of 3 is not safety. An answer of 3 keeps it coming back, keeps the question open, keeps the conversation alive, night after night, year after year, the door propped just wide enough for a lifetime. My father answered 3 every night for 40 years, and it wore him down to nothing, one polite knock at a time, like water on a stone, until one tired March night the stone gave and he answered 4. The courtesy was never a wall. The courtesy was just the long, slow, patient road by which it eventually takes everyone who walks it. So I gave it nothing. I sat in the silence and I let it knock, and I did not answer. 3. A pause. 3. A longer pause, a waiting pause, a pause that had a question in it. And then, and this is the sound I know I'll be hearing when I die, whenever and however that comes, it knocked 4 times. Knock, 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 knock. It asked, it offered, it opened the door from its own side and held it wide. And then it waited in the dark 40 feet away for me to get up out of the chair and come. I gripped the axe handle until my knuckles ached, and I bit down on the want until I tasted blood, and I did not move and I did not make a sound. I thought about water. I made myself think about water, about rainfall and runoff and gauge heights, and the slow, honest, dependable numbers of my real life down the mountain. The life with no monsters in it, the life that was still, somehow, mine to go back to. I counted my own breaths in and out, slow, just to keep from counting along toward 4. I did not give it a person. I gave it nothing to take hold of, no answer, no acknowledgement, no knock, no open door, Nothing, just a dark cabin and a silent man inside it who would not say goodnight. It knocked once more. Closer now, much closer, the sound coming hard against the woodshed wall, 60 feet out, on the soft ground where the knees go, the exact place where they found my father in the spring. And then it was quiet, and the quiet held. The lake came back into my ears. The ordinary small sounds of the night came back, the water on the rocks, the cabin settling. The lamp burned down and guttered, and I sat in the full dark with the axe across my knees and my eyes open until the window went grey, the second dawn I had watched come up through that glass. And when there was finally enough light to make out the tree line, I made myself look, and there was nothing there. No shape, no kneeling thing, no man. Just the trees and the woodshed, and the soft, patient ground, and the cold, flat morning lying over all of it like nothing at all had happened in the night. I left within the hour. I didn't finish packing. I didn't even lock the door. I put the green notebooks and the photocopied pages and my father's axe in the cab of the truck, and I drove down the mountain with the heater roaring and the radio on loud, and I have not been back. I let the cabin go. The bank has it now, and I'm told a family from the city is meant to buy it in the spring, a couple with 2 young kids, the realtor said, looking for somewhere to teach the children to swim and fish, somewhere safe and quiet and far from everything, and I have not been able to make myself warn them, because what would I say? What words could I possibly put in a man's mouth that wouldn't get him gently walked to the door? Bears don't knock 3 times, keep the line clean, answer 3, but better to answer nothing. Don't let your children make a friend of the dark. They would look at me with that careful pity people save for the obviously bereaved, and they would thank me, and they would buy the cabin anyway. Maybe I am sick with grief. Some nights I'd give anything to believe that's all it is. But I'll tell you the thing that keeps me up, the reframe, the piece I only fit into place weeks later, lying awake in my apartment 40 miles from the nearest real tree. My father did not invent the game to comfort me. I had believed that for 37 years, believed it the way you believe the ground is solid, without ever once thinking about it. A kind father's clever trick. A bedtime invention to turn a scared boy's dark into a friend. But it was right there in the inherited document, in the faded brown toner. It was older than him. The knocking had been coming to that line every night long before I was ever born to be afraid of it. He didn't invent a way to soothe his son. He taught a frightened child the one answer that would keep the thing polite. He was protecting me. That's what the lie was. He spent 40 summers standing between me and that tree line, answering 3 so that I never had to, teaching me the manners of the thing just well enough that I could survive one night alone if I ever absolutely had to, and never, ever well enough to understand what I was really speaking to in the dark. He gave me a friend to love so that I would not grow up afraid. And here is the part I cannot get past, the part that sits in my chest like a stone that won't pass. The love was real. The love was completely, entirely real. It was also the leash, and he held the other end of it his whole life, and he never once, not for a single night, let me feel its weight. And the last thing he ever did, the very last thing, the thing they wrote down as a bear, was walk out to that line himself, in the cold, alone, so that he would never have to pick up the phone and call his grown son up the mountain to help him answer it. So that I would never have to learn the 4th knock. So that the leash would die with him and I would go on believing, down in my safe, ordinary life, that the dark was a friend. I think about him out there in the March cold, tired past bearing. So lonely for me he could hardly stand to be inside his own quiet house, hearing his own good night come back to him out of the trees in a voice that had learned to sound like love, and choosing to walk toward it alone, rather than ever once teach his boy the way out to the line. I keep my windows locked now, all of them, year-round. There's no forest here. There's a parking lot and a sodium street light that buzzes, and the sound of traffic on the boulevard that never fully stops, only thins. And I tell myself that's why I sleep with the lamp on the noise, the city, ordinary nameable things, a grown man's harmless habit. But 3 nights ago, very late, when the traffic finally thinned all the way down to nothing and the building went still and the radiator stopped its ticking, I heard it, from outside my window. 3rd floor, 40 miles from any tree, knock, 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 slow, even, patient. It found me. Of course it found me. It learned my father's voice over 60 years at a tree line. It could learn a city in a single season. It learned the boundaries of a third-floor window the way it once learned the edge of a clearing. And it has come to my boundary every night since, and it knocks its 3, and it asks the only question it has ever known how to ask. The question it will go on asking long after I'm gone, and the people after me are gone too. Is someone home? Is someone a person? Is this ground still claimed? And every night I lie in the lamplight and I do not answer. I won't give it 3. 3 is what my father gave it, every night for 40 years, and 3 is what kept it coming back. 3 is the propped door and the open question and the long, slow road that ends at the line. I will not keep that conversation alive, and I will never ever for any voice it borrows or any night I'm weak give it 4. So I just lie there and I give it nothing. I count my own breaths in the dark. I wait for the grey to come up behind the blinds, and in the worst hour of the night, the hour when I'm most tired and most alone and the want comes up through me like cold water filling a boot, when the knocking takes on a cadence I'd know anywhere and something almost says my name, I think about a man sitting on the edge of a too-small bed with the lamp turned low, teaching a scared little boy to knock 3 times on a cedar wall. And I understand, finally, all the way down, what he was really telling me. Good night, Danny. Don't answer. Whatever it sounds like out there, whoever it sounds like, don't ever answer.